In order to give myself a better understanding of what was already in the media about the topic of mental health, and also what the media's current stance on it was, I did some research about the topic and gathered some information together from various articles. This would give me the chance to start to gain an understanding as to why there could be a stigma surrounding mental health, the question that my documentary will endeavour to answer. The first article I looked into was by BBC Newsbeat and looked at the inadequacy of young people's mental health care. The majority of specialist nurses say mental health care for young people isn't good enough. The Royal College of Nursing carried out a survey with 631 workers in children and adolescent services for the Guardian newspaper. Findings in the survey were 43% of the respondents said the services were getting worse, 13% thought services were good enough, identifying understaffing and delays of some of the main problems. 73% of the workers said there were too few nurses. 72% said there were delays in the patients getting appointments. 69% pointed to young people being sent out of area to get inpatient care because of bed shortages in the area. 59% pointed to the inability of staff to give patients as many appointments or as much care as they needed. Mental health care nurses state they are concerned that the rationing of access to care and shortage of beds are so bad that young people are at an increased risk of harming or even killing themselves. According to a nurse who works on the acute ward for people with severe and enduring mental illness, the problems with the NHS all come down to lack of money. She says patients should be treated with a mixture of therapy and medication. Due to lack of money and resources, a lack of staff and lack of access to certain therapies, patients now mostly get treated with medication. You don't have time to sit with them, and if you do, you end up going home late, which we do quite often. Access to therapy in patient units and more treatment in the community are all needed, because there are long waiting lists. People need to feel like they're important, and it's very difficult to do that with the lack of resources that we have. If people feel like they're being helped, they'll get better. The governments have said they are investing £1.4 billion in young people's mental health services, stating that overall mental health funding for both adults and children went up to an estimated £11.7 billion between 2014 and 2015. NHS England has also announced an extra £25 million for NHS organisations in England to improve mental health services for children. Young Mind's Chief Executive, Sarah Brennan, says children's mental health services have been woefully underfunded for years. While the government's extra investment is welcome, it's unclear whether it's making a difference to frontline services. Even if the new money is spent where it's intended, the Chief of NHS England has admitted that it will only be enough to reach a third of the children who need help. Because of long waiting lists, the threshold for accessing specialist services has got higher. Without treatment, problems are likely to escalate and children are more likely to self-harm or become suicidal, to be violent and aggressive, or to drop out of school, which can ruin their prospects for the future. Delays can also have a disastrous effect on families, with parents forced to leave their jobs to look after their children. Another article I looked at was sourced from BBC Science and focused on when your mental health becomes a problem. In the UK, 1 in 4 people are expected to experience mental health problems in their lifetime. Despite these statistics being pretty high, stigma and discrimination surrounding such health issues is still very common, an example of which is the myth that a mental illness is down to a person's weakness. Someone who is considered mentally healthy can normally cope with the normal demands and stresses of life, whilst also taking care of themselves. They are also able to realise their potential and make a contribution to their community. However, your mental health or sense of well-being doesn't always stay the same. It can change depending on your circumstances and stages in life. It is natural for everyone to go through periods when they feel negative emotions such as stress and grief, but symptoms of mental illnesses last longer and aren't a reaction to daily events. It becomes some sort of way of life. Eventually these symptoms become serious enough to interfere with someone's ability to function, and that is when it may be considered that they are suffering from a significant psychological or mental illness. For example, someone with clinical depression will feel a persistent and intense sadness, which in turn makes them feel unmotivated and withdrawn from life, almost like they are living in some sort of parallel universe. Often such symptoms develop over several weeks or even months, however on some occasions they may come on rapidly. It is different for every sufferer. Mental health problems are grouped into two broad categories, neurotic and psychotic, which help experts to refer people for the right care and treatment. Neurotic conditions are branded as being extreme forms of normal emotional experiences, for instance depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Psychotic conditions interfere with a person's perception of reality by impairing their thoughts and judgments. Examples include schizophrenia, personality disorder, and bipolar disorder. Around 1 in every 10 experience neurotic mood disorders at one given time. 1 in 100 are affected by psychotic conditions. Despite being statistically common, mental illness is still stigmatised heavily in society. Fortunately though, most people recover or learn to live with the problem, especially if it is diagnosed earlier and the sufferer gets the correct help. It is generally unknown as to what the exact cause of most mental illnesses are, as it is commonly dependent on the sufferer's circumstances. However, a combination of physical, environmental and psychological factors are thought to play a role. A genetic link has been suggested as one cause of some mental illnesses, including bipolar disorder, running in the family. Experts believe many mental illnesses are linked to abnormalities in several genes. Some people can be made more vulnerable to suffering due to certain psychological risk factors, including neglect, loss of a parent, or experiencing abuse. Of course, difficult life events can be a big trigger to mental health problems, especially in a person who is susceptible. These consist of illness, divorce, death of a loved one, losing a job, substance abuse, social expectations, and a dysfunctional family life. Mental illnesses cannot be tested by checking blood or body fluids. Instead, it is usually diagnosed by an experienced psychiatrist or clinical psychologist after studying and monitoring a patient's symptoms. Different mental health issues can have overlapping symptoms, so it can be hard to tell the conditions apart. For instance, many of those who suffer from depression can additionally suffer from strong symptoms of anxiety disorders. In order to diagnose the condition, psychiatrists in the UK may refer to the World Health Organisation's International Classification of Diseases system. This consists of known mental health problems, along with their symptoms under various subcategories. Some experts argue that this system relies too strongly on medical approaches for mental health problems, and claim that it implies too strongly that emotional distress is simply a brain abnormality, and underplay the social and psychological causes of distress. They claim that this leads to a reliance on antidepressants and antipsychotic drugs, despite there being lots of evidence to suggest there are serious side effects and poor evidence of their effectiveness. According to the Royal College of Psychiatrists, in the UK, anxiety will affect 10% of the population. Bipolar will affect 1 in every 100 people, 1 in every 150 15-year-old girls, and 1 in every 1,000 15-year-old boys will suffer from anorexia. 20% of people will become depressed at some point in their lives. OCD will affect 2%. Personality disorder will affect 1 in 10, though it won't be as severe for some as it is for others. Schizophrenia will affect 1 in every 100.